Coming up, after one of the strangest days in SEC history, Tennessee may be turning to a very different name as its next coach. We'll talk about it all next, right here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, I'm Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. It was a busy weekend in the SEC. We'll talk about it all. Championship game is set between Georgia and Auburn. Alabama on the verge of being left out of the playoff. Coaching hire at Florida, but it's probably Tennessee, Mike, that dominated the news cycle yesterday. As Greg Schiano was almost hired, backlash from Vols fans keeps that from happening. Tennessee now left to deal with the aftermath of all of that, and we may see the first domino toppling here as Bruce Feldman from Fox Sports is reporting that all of a sudden T. Martin, the former Vol quarterback, won a national championship there in 1998, current USC offensive coordinator, that he may have emerged as a legitimate candidate for this job after not really being on that radar before all of this goes down with Schiano over the weekend. How do you feel about this as a response to what happened yesterday?
Well, this is the direction they have to go. If you're John Currie right now, I mean, how bad did you gauge the situation yesterday? I mean, yesterday was as bad a day for an SEC program as we've seen in quite some time. When you talk about the backlash, the possible hire, having to back out of that, the president has to release a statement. Everybody's weighing in on what's going on at Tennessee right now, and I think they have to go after a Tennessee name. I mean, do they not? Do they have to get T. Martin in this job? I think this is the best possible hire. Him and David Cutcliffe have come up a ton in the last 24 hours. I think no matter who it is, if I'm John Currie, I'm sending Peyton Manning out to the podium to introduce this guy. I'm not going out there.
So a couple things here. You mentioned two names. You mentioned David Cutcliffe, the current Duke coach, was the former Tennessee offensive coordinator, a close ally of Philip Fulmer, of Peyton Manning, two guys that we believe have the ear of John Currie in this discussion. But Cutcliffe as a candidate is very different than T. Martin.
Yes.
Cutcliffe is older than 60, which is a down mark on him in his candidacy, but has won at Duke, won pretty significantly at Ole Miss, which would make him maybe a little bit more of an attractive hire. How do you compare what makes him different from a guy like Martin, which Bruce Feldman is reporting has a legit shot at this job? He's younger. He may be a better recruiter, but he doesn't have that coaching experience at the head coaching level. I mean, how would you sort of separate Cutcliffe and Martin here, two very different candidates?
Well, I think T. Martin right now is at the top of the list. When you look at possible coaching candidates, somebody that can save John Currie's job possibly or get the Tennessee fan base to rally around you, T. Martin's at the top of the heap. But guess what? If T. Martin doesn't want the job, if he says, man, that's a debacle over there, I don't want to have to deal with what's going on in Knoxville right now. I love my home at USC. I love how things are going out on the West Coast. Then David Cutcliffe, to me, has to be the fallback guy. I think that if you're going to lose a fan base, if you look any other direction, we're going to hear Vols fans all day today, and a lot of these guys will be in the comment section. You're going to hear Lane Kiffin's name. You're going to hear Mike Norvell. You're going to wonder why Matt Campbell didn't get a better look for the job. To me, it's narrowed down to those two just because of the backlash from the fan base yesterday. I think that when you look around the country, people that aren't associated with Tennessee aren't looking to really become a part of Tennessee right now. This is kind of a dark age for them.
Let me get some comments here. Steve Weaver says, TJ Baldwin says, no respectable coach is going to take on that dumpster fire, referencing how bad things are at Tennessee right now. Darren Stinchcomb, let me scroll down and get this one a little bit more. Stinchcomb says, nobody wanted T. Martin. Now, all of a sudden, he would be a great hire. Give me a break. And there is an element of that for me that feels true as well, Darren. Yeah. I think that T. Martin would be a very interesting person to have as a member of your staff. At one point in time, I would have thought about him as a candidate for this job, but before the events of the Greg Schiano disaster from Sunday, we were hearing about him more as a candidate for the South Alabama job and a possibility, according to Jason Lockenfora from CBS, joining John Gruden as an offensive coordinator. We didn't hear sort of these name brand, bold print officials telling us that Martin was ready for a big job like this. It would scare me to think that Tennessee sort of settling and sort of reconsidering a guy that had already vetted and decided wasn't quite ready for a job of this magnitude.
Well, I don't know they're going to have any choice. When you look at what happened yesterday, and we're going to go back and forth all day. We're going to talk about this obviously a bunch. Is it a bad look for fans? Is it a bad look for John Currie? Is it on Greg Schiano? We sat here and listened for the last couple of weeks. Mike Griffith, Josh Ward, everybody on SECCountry.com, Jimbo Fisher's name came up. Mike Leach's name came up. Chris Peterson. Those guys don't want that job right now. They're looking at that job and saying, man, anybody be crazy to go to Tennessee right now. I still think it's a great job. I think that they're going to land a guy that's probably going to do a lot better than Butch Jones did. But I think right now it has to be T. Martin or David Cutcliffe. I think if you go away from Tennessee guys, you can bring up Jeff Brom at Purdue. But other than those three outside of that circle, I'm not sure who's going to take it.
Kevin A. Hall says, fire Brandon. What'd I do? The show just started. The week just started. We just came off a happy Thanksgiving. I haven't done anything to warrant being fired yet, I don't think. Dennis Hand, though, says, what about Lane Kiffin? And obviously Kiffin's also out there. He wants to get a bigger job, almost for sure. Been the Tennessee coach at one point in the past. It would have seemed laughable not that long ago that he would actually come back to Tennessee, but he is also the guy that would kind of clean up this mess created with Vols fans right now, right?
Well, hey, listen, obviously we've talked about Lane Kiffin. He's been tweeting. He's been all over the map as far as guest appearances on shows have been. He's kind of kept his name afloat. I think that Lane Kiffin would go back to Knoxville, but would the uproar not be any worse than yesterday? Would the uproar be any better? Greg Schiano over Lane Kiffin or vice versa? I think you have to steer away from anything that might incense any sector of Vols fans in the coming weeks. I think you have to find a guy that most people are going to love or are willing to give the benefit of the doubt to.
Jackson Sparks says T. Martin would be 1,000 times the higher Greg Schiano is, but also what about Jim Bob Cooter, who is the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator. Listen, I don't follow the NFL nearly as closely as I follow college football, but Detroit is in a situation where it's in a playoff race here in the NFC North. You wouldn't be able to take him on as your coach until that season ended in Detroit. I don't think a coach is going to leave an NFL season before it's done. I think that removes him from discussion because you can't wait until January to hire a coach with an early signing period coming up in really just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to take a couple of guys. It's not just the NFL. I mean, look at the guys that are coordinators and teams that could possibly make playoff runs. We're going to talk about Jeremy Pruitt today as far as that Tennessee and Mississippi State job go. Possibly even, a guy like Mel Tucker that, on the outside looking in at the playoff right now. Those are guys that are going to come up. But do you want to wait until the end of December, possibly January, and get past that early signing period without a head coach? If you're part of the Tennessee program right now, I don't think that's the answer if you're John Currie.
Let me remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless Direct TV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. And you can't really talk about this situation at Tennessee without also getting to the John Currie situation. So let's go ahead and do that. What we planned on starting with today are item number 1 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And have no fear. We'll talk Iron Bowl. We'll talk Dan Mullen. We're going to do it all. We'll preview the SEC Championship. It's going to be a busy show in a lot of regards. I do want to hit this other aspect of the Tennessee story here real quick off the top. And that's pretty simple. Can John Currie, the Tennessee athletic director, survive what's going on here? Let me give you a couple of examples of what's being said. I mentioned Bruce Feldman before. Feldman also had this tweet about what might be going on with John Currie's future. Feldman says that he's told that there's increasing pressure now from big money Vols boosters to force John Currie out in the wake of Sunday's news. Tennessee source told me that this is such a hot mess. Just when you think they've gotten out of the ditch, they've fallen into a much bigger one. And I agree with Feldman on this, or the people who are saying this. I don't personally see how John Currie could survive this.
How many times have we talked about John Currie leading up to this? Why has he not come out and said anything about John Gruden? He's as much to blame for this as anybody else that's ever been associated with a bad hire. I mean, he has not said anything publicly, and you're going to look for situations like this. But we talked about Thursday. He was in the Bahamas. He's a guy that's been flying back, coast to coast trying to find this Tennessee coach. Greg Schiano was the best he came up with. Why is the money not being thrown around from there's like bigger names associated with the Arkansas job right now than there was with Tennessee. I'm with you. I think he had as bad a feel for this program and the pulse of the fan base as anybody I've seen as an AD in a long time.
So I don't want to say I told you so, but this is one of those examples where I was 1,000% right. All last week and over again I said that Curry's making a huge mistake by allowing those John Gruden rumors to fester. If he was not going to hire John Gruden, and apparently he never was actually truly considering that, we always thought here on this show that the coach that Tennessee did hire was going to suffer by comparison. Not because Gruden was a guarantee to be a great coach, but because that's who a large portion of the Tennessee fans wanted. Even as recently as Sunday, you had the Lock and Four report that I mentioned before saying that Gruden was coming, he was going to make $10 million a year, whatever, and he was bringing T. Martin with him as offensive coordinator, Martin who has a reputation of being a good recruiter. How could Vols fans not want that? I mean, that sounds like such a great deal. It sounds like the kind of thing you get excited for. John Currie had an obligation here, Mike, to manage expectations, and he didn't do it. When he loses his job, that's going to be the reason why.
Yeah, I agree with you. And not only that, it gets even worse. What if he has to pay Greg Schiano his buyout?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're talking about the dumpster fire of all dumpster fires, and John Currie is the leader, the ringleader. And this whole scenario, and we've talked about this. Like you said, it was like an I told you so scenario, and we kept bringing it up for the last couple of weeks. He didn't have the pulse of the fan base. And it was like, why are you not coming out and leading this from the forefront? You know, at least Scott Strickland, for everything you can knock him down about at Florida, he was being vocal. He was answering questions about that. John Curry's been hiding behind a lot of the press and the media for quite some time. Then all of a sudden, he finally comes out and has his head coach, and Knoxville's rioting just about.
Yeah, and listen, you mentioned not having the pulse of the fan base. That's so true. And listen, you're going to see like the sort of I call them the blue check brigade, all these super serious journalists who are going to criticize Tennessee for being led by mob rule here. You've already got Kirk Herbstreit, who apparently believes that he's now beyond reproach, that no one can question his opinions about anything. He's criticizing Tennessee fans here. You can see right here on my shirt who I cheer for. I'm not a Tennessee fan, but I'm going to stick up for Tennessee fans on this one. They had every right to revolt on the Schiano thing. Not because he's definitely going to be a bad hire or would have been a bad hire. There's a chance he actually might have been better than some Vols fans thought. And not because he knowingly covered up the stuff at Penn State. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that he didn't. But Tennessee fans didn't want this guy. The guys that played for him at Rutgers, most of them don't support Greg Schiano. Guys that played for him, the Tampa Bay Bucks, you have a hard time finding people who say good things about him. I don't care about Bill Belichick and Urban Meyer vouching for this guy. Belichick and Meyer have been proven to have a lot of skeletons in their claws in the past. They're not necessarily reputable allies for someone like Greg Schiano. The fact that Tennessee fans didn't want this, they have every right to feel that way. And I believe that athletic directors in this case have an obligation to know the pulse of your fan base, and that's another reason why Curry's going to be out the door here.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you talk about a guy like Bob Petrino, you can talk about a guy like Lane Kiffin, you can ask questions about their background, and Tennessee fans for the most part have said, hey, we don't want those guys. We don't want those guys in the position. All of a sudden you bring in a guy with questionable background history. And we're not even going to get into Penn State stuff. A lot of it's hearsay. A lot of it, he did have to, did have a hand in some of the stuff that went on up there. But I think that really he's got a right to go after this buyout because nobody's ever going to approach him for a head coaching position again. His name's been jugged through the mud just as much as anybody else.
We're going to talk Iron Bowl here in like 30 seconds, I promise. Let me squeeze in one more point on this, and you brought it up. The idea that you might have to pay a buyout to Greg Schiano. I don't think he would have been a great hire for Tennessee, but I understand why he would want a buyout given the fact that his coaching reputation has been ruined by the way that John Curry handled this situation. Here is what McCann from SI.com, this is actually a retweet from Bruce Feldman, what he wrote about the situation here. Michael McCann, he's a lawyer that's connected to SI, that John Curry would actually be a key witness if Schiano did sue Tennessee. And it would actually likely be better for UT if Curry is employed by UT in the event Schiano sues. Curry could have much to tell and share. If Tennessee fires Curry, the school better negotiate a non-disclosure agreement with him. That's Michael McCann, a legal expert for SI, saying that if Schiano sues, I believe he will, that Curry could actually be the key witness for Schiano. That's an example of just how bad this has all gone for Tennessee over the last 24 hours.
You talk about a complete downward trajectory, and now they're left all kind of holding their hands up in the air, wondering who's even going to take the job. It's not even about can we go out and find a good coach. It's like who wants to come here and coach this team after the uproar. And I think they'll find a good guy. I think that T. Martin will probably eventually land getting the job. But do you keep John Curry around? And if you do keep him around, just for the sense of what we're talking about law-wise, how are the fans going to accept that? How are you going to accept Beverly Davenport, the president of Tennessee at that point? How is she not going to be questioned? And I think everybody has to answer for what happened yesterday at Tennessee, and those two names at the top of the list.
Well, right now, Beverly Davenport's sticking by John Curry. She says, I regret the events of yesterday for everyone involved. University remains steadfast in its commitment to excellence, and I look forward to John Curry continuing the search to bring the next football coach to Tennessee. That's obviously meant to quell the rumors that maybe Curry would be fired before the next coach could be hired. Davenport does her job to keep that conversation at bay. Let me move on here to item number 2 in our AT&T SEC Country Life First and 10 list, and I love the sense of humor that some of our viewers have shown in the comment section here, talking about the idea of getting a do-over for the Iron Bowl on Saturday. That's what some of the Alabama fans were talking about a moment ago, but obviously no do-over coming for the Crimson Tide. They do lose the game to Auburn on Saturday. And, for me, this was always the moment that I feared for Alabama. In a matchup against an elite quarterback, I believe Jarrett Stidham is that for Auburn. I didn't know that Jalen Hurts would be able to hold up. And we saw multiple dimension of Stidham's game on Saturday. He can throw the football, but he also ran the ball more than maybe Nick Saban, the Alabama coaches, would have expected. I thought he outplayed Jalen Hurts. Do you think that Hurts' shortcomings the reason why Alabama lost on Saturday?
I actually don't. I can't put this squarely on Jalen Hurts. I think when you look at his numbers, 13 of 23, 177 yards, 1 touchdown. That's what we've seen from him all year. Jalen Hurts is what Jalen Hurts is. I think if you're going to blame this loss at his feet, then you have to obviously heap on every amount of of praise that you've given to him in the last year. Over everything that's happened to him, I think Jalen Hurts has been the same. He's 13 of 23, 4 or 5 throwaways in the game. His young receiver core just wasn't getting open. Calvin Ridley was not as big a piece of the game as you want him to be. And when you look at the running backs in the backfield, Damian Harris and Bo Scarborough averaging 8.5 and 7.7 yards per carry. Those guys should have gotten the ball more. I realize that Jalen Hurts is a big part of the running game, but those running backs in the backfield doing the work they've done, the time of possession, everything kind of encompassed. This one's not on Jalen Hurts for me. I think that he is what he has been all year.
Jeremy Pettis in the comment section says Hurts had more runs than all the running backs combined. That aspect of the game plan was strange. I have to admit that.
Yeah, it's very telling to me, and I love what Brian Daboll's done, but sometimes he attacks the matchups. He has that NFL coaching philosophy as far as a coordinator goes, but sometimes in college football, you just have to, put your will on the other team. That's what Alabama's been known for. That's just not the way he attacked the game.
After the game, Nick Saban did talk about the performance that he saw from his quarterback, Jalen Hurts. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I think Jalen really competed in the game. He made a lot of plays in the game. He scrambled a lot with his feet. We just didn't do a good enough job in the passing game. But that's not just Jalen. We didn't have good enough protection. We didn't have guys getting open. Maybe we needed to have better design in what we did. And he probably could have done a little better job of reading some things.
Cliff Nelson agrees with Saban on that last point. He says Hurts' inability to read defenses led him to holding the ball against a superior pass rush. That may have been true. Billy Johnson says Hurts did not play his best game, but it's not all his fault. There are a lot of reasons. Eric Wilkie, though, on the other hand, says when your quarterback is your leading rusher, you deserve to lose. Here's the thing, though. Alabama doesn't play a lot of games like this. They blow teams out normally. There aren't those tense fourth quarter moments where Alabama's facing a deficit like it faced on Saturday or in a close tie game. It's those moments when your quarterback's got to make a throw, not run the ball, got to make a throw, got to make something happen. And I always wondered if Hurts was going to have the ability to do that. And I believe on Saturday, Mike, I saw him come up short in that regard.
Yeah, he definitely did. It's almost very similar to what the questions we asked about Georgia when Jake Fromm was going into Auburn. Obviously, home field advantage in both those games plays a huge deciding factor. But when you look at Alabama's ability all year not to beat themselves, that's one of the biggest points. How many times have I said that about Jalen Hurts? It's not so much what he does, it's what he doesn't do. He doesn't beat himself. 2 botched snaps on huge third and fourth down plays. Obviously, one of those got taken away. The botched field goal attempt, the fumble early in the game by Jalen Hurts. This was not an Alabama team that didn't beat themselves. They actually did in a lot of ways.
Jeremy Pettis says Tua Tagovailoa is going to win the quarterback job next year. Daboll and Saban are going to go back with a more pro-style offense with some RPO with Tua. I have to admit, based on what I've seen from Tua this year, what I saw from him in high school, I think that Tua would have been a more dangerous quarterback against Auburn on Saturday, the kind of guy who could have found a Jerry Jeudy, who could have avoided the terrible decision on the Hurts throw that the tight end almost dove and caught. Right. He could have avoided some of those kind of things. I think if Tua's the Alabama quarterback, I think Alabama wins that game on Saturday.
It's easy to say, too, and this is kind of the same thing I brought up a couple of weeks ago about Kirby Smart, how the loss kind of allows you to make changes. You can't go in undefeated and then all of a sudden make changes at the quarterback position. You're opening yourself up to criticism because guess what? If Tua's not the answer and Alabama loses the game, well, guess what? Jalen Hurts is now crowned the king. I mean, this guy's coming back to be the savior of everything. I think you had to go in with the same game plan you have all year that's gotten you to 11-0 and number 1 in the country. But I do think the door is now open throughout ball practice, throughout spring football, where there will be a quarterback battle. Jalen Hurts can win a lot of games. Can he win the biggest games is the question that Nick Saban's going to have to answer.
Josh Ray said Tua would have folded under the pressure of that moment. Well, I guess we'll never know for sure. Yeah. Although Paul Tops in the comment section says Tua is better than Jalen Hurts. One thing is for sure, Alabama's alive still for a college football playoff spot. Maybe. We'll talk later on the show about what the Crimson Tide needs to have happen in order for that to be true. Let me move on here to the Florida Gators, the subject of item number 3 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So Florida kind of flew under the radar a little bit. Tennessee had all the drama, but Florida also kind of an interesting situation here. We had talked for days and days seemingly about Chip Kelly potentially being the guy at Florida. Yep. I suggested last week that I didn't think that would eventually happen, but certainly that's where all the news reports were going. Then there was the thought that Scott Frost may be the number 2 choice, but then Florida swoops in, and today, landing the plane there in Gainesville, Florida, is former Mississippi State coach Dan Mullen, now introduced. He is officially now the coach of the Florida Gators. You see him doing the Gator Chomp as he gets out of the private jet there, hugging Scott Strickland, landing back at a place that he was once the offensive coordinator and had great success. Do you think Mullen is a good hire for Florida?
I think he's the hire that Florida needs. I think when you look at Chip Kelly, and obviously you miss on Scott Frost, I think that Dan Mullen was kind of in that third-tier range of coaches you kind of fall back on, but still a very good coach. And we talked about this, and you're a little bit higher on Dan Mullen than I am, but I think the situation is perfect at Florida where He doesn't have to be a crazy good defensive coach. You're going to have a lot of speed. He's reportedly already offered Todd Grantham the job as a defense coordinator down there. He's beginning to poach some of those coaches from his Mississippi State staff to bring them down. And I think he's the right guy at the right time. Hey, it's been so long since Florida's had a quarterback. That's what Dan Mullen does.
Yeah.
He goes in and makes quarterbacks better than they possibly are and gets offenses rolling. I think this could be a great recipe for success down there.
And listen, you can see the sweater that I'm wearing right now. It's got the Georgia G on it, so you understand the perspective which I'm coming from when I say this. The guy you just saw there, Dan Mullen, that's not good news to the people who wear this logo. And I'm not telling you that Dan Mullen is going to overtake Kirby Smart. I don't think that's ready to happen as of yet. But as that Georgia-Florida rivalry now gotten a little closer, and is the Florida program in a better position now than it was before it hired Dan Mullen? I believe so. I mean, it was a year ago I was telling people that I thought that McElwain had some cracks in the foundation at Florida. He was not recruiting well. He had some issues. And I thought, we said this on AT&T SEC Country Live, I said this on Dog Nation Daily, I thought that McElwain was going to have some problems come to roost here this year. That happened. It happened every bit as quickly as I would have imagined it would.
Yeah.
Florida needed an upgrade, and Dan Mullen provides that upgrade for Florida, I believe, in a way that Chip Kelly would not. Chip Kelly to Florida, even though he was the bigger name, the bigger splash hire, that's actually much better news for Florida's rivals than Dan Mullen, a guy who knows the SEC, who knows quarterbacks, a proven head coach, a guy that's exceeded expectations at Mississippi State. I think this is a good day for the Gators here, and I say that as one who would not call myself a Gators fan.
Yeah, listen, I got to agree with Kevin Grubb in the comment section. He says that Mullen may not be a splash hire, but he was the right choice. And that's exactly what it comes down to, in my opinion, when you look at where this Florida program is. You don't really need the splash hire right now. You need a guy who's good with X's and O's. That's what Dan Mullen is. I thought all along Chip Kelly would wind up being the guy because I thought Florida was the best opening and he was the best head coach available. But, he prefers to go out to the Pac-12 where you can open things up. You're not going to face a ton of good defenses. He will be successful at UCLA. Now, when you look at Mullen to Florida, I think, like I said, it's the right choice at the right time and the right spot, and I think that he could have a lot of success there.
A lot of comments coming in here. Nick Bonanno says, relax, BA. He's bringing Todd Grantham with him. And yeah, listen, for everything I like about Mullen as a head coach, I do think it's somewhat laughable that he's going to bring Todd Grantham with him. Yeah. I would have much rather seen Mullen find a way to keep Randy Shannon involved there as a Florida fan, somehow making those current 2018 recruits feel a little bit better about the situation. I don't think Grantham's an upgrade over last year's defensive coordinator Randy Shannon, and he sure as heck is not an upgrade over Jeff Collins, the guy they had before 2016.
Well, and let me go from Dan Mullen's side of this, because I've been involved in some of these coaching changes when Mike Shula was fired at Alabama. It's hard to keep a guy on staff because I think it's hard to get your players' attention and get them buying into a new system when you have a lot of the old staff still there and they still have their own way of kind of doing things. Randy Shannon has been coaching his football team as the head coach for the last few weeks. So how do you keep him on staff and try to make him a part of this new program? I think it was the right move for Dan Mullen. I'm not saying Todd Grantham's going to be an elite level guy, but he's going to have some great athletes to work with down there.
Raymond Cox says, read my lips, Mullen's not beating UGA. And Raymond, for the most part, I agree with you. I think the edge still belongs to Kirby Smart in Georgia here, but I do think Mullen closes that gap at Florida. Cliff Nelson says, not sure Mullen has the ability to recruit on the level of a Kirby Smart, a Nick Saban, or Ned Orgeron. I think it's unfair to make that assumption about Mullen on the basis of what he did at Mississippi State, because that's not a hotbed for recruiting. Yeah. You're sharing a small state with another SEC school. That's a big knock against you right there. But the fact of the matter is he got Leo Lewis to Mississippi State somehow, some way, but nonetheless he's there. High 4-star linebacker. Jeffrey Simmons, 5-star defensive end, came to Mississippi State. So he's won. It's more than just the junior college kids at Mississippi State. There are some 4-star guys in that defense. One of the reasons why Mississippi State's been ranked all season long is because of that 4- and 5-star talent they have on that defense. If he can get some of those guys to Starkville, he can get more of them in Gainesville.
I was going to say, let's not focus on what he couldn't get to Starkville. Let's focus on what he did with the guys that did come. And he, for every hole that you could possibly poke in his resume over his time at Mississippi State, he got that team to play as well as they have in the last 10, 20 years. And I think there's something to say for that.
I also agree with Kevin Grubb, who mentions Matt Corral working with Dan Mullen. Matt Corral's the 2018 quarterback who I'm going to assume probably sticks with Florida now. I don't think he's necessarily a take for Alabama. Alabama wants Emory Jones, the current Ohio State commit. That's who it's putting its quarterback focus on right now. I think Corral probably sticks with Florida. I think Corral, who, and we've shown you these video clips here on AT&T SEC Country Live before, he's actually a little bit more mobile than people realize, even though he's sort of thought of as a passing quarterback. I think Corral, the 2018 commit, is a pretty good quarterback. quarterback for Mullen to inherit and work with.
Well, I think there's a spot for Corral. If he does still decide to go to Florida, I think you have Kadarius Toney also on the roster. He's a guy that can kind of fill that void of that dual threat quarterback. And maybe it does work out like you have a Chris Leak, Tim Tebow situation that Dan Mullen worked with under Urban Meyer, to where Chris Leak's the guy that can come in, he can throw the ball downfield, but when you need that extra jolt in the running game on some of those third and shorts, you can bring in a guy like Toney. I don't think it just has to be one guy. Corral can be put in that locker room right now, and I think that Dan Mullen could work with him.
Let me remind you, AT&T's proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Also, let me remind you, this upcoming Friday, normally we do the show Monday through Thursday. This week we're doing a very special Friday show, 7 p.m. Eastern Time at the Hooters downtown Atlanta, right there on Peachtree Street. Auburn fans, you're in the game now. That's the next day. If you're coming into Atlanta, please come by and see us. 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Hooters downtown. Georgia fans, obviously we expect to see a lot of y'all in the building there as well. This is our first kind of live broadcast for AT&T SEC Country Live. I'm really excited about being Hooters next week. It's going to be a lot of fun.
We're going to be down on the scene right there in the shadow of Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I think it's going to be a great night for everybody involved. Auburn fans and Georgia fans, come hang out with us.
I'll also tell you that Hooters got a special offer right now. If you're looking forward to watching some football this weekend, maybe you can't get into the game, but you're looking forward to watching at home, how about this great deal from Hooters? You can get it anytime. It doesn't have to be Saturday. But on an online to-go order, $5 off your order of $25 or more, but you've got to use the promo code SEC Fans. Use the promo code SEC Fans. They'll give you $5 off your order of $25 or more, but it's got to be online. It's got to be to go. Check them out at Hooters.com for more on that. All right, let's talk about Jimbo Fisher here. It's item number 4 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And Fisher to Texas A&M is one of these things that's starting to build some steam here. The idea that he could be in the mix for the Aggies. Let me show you some of what's been said on the internet about this, where some of these rumors kind of come from here. Let me show you the first of these screen grabs here. We'll kind of read this. This comes from Zach Barnett from Football Scoop, who says the latest buzz inside the profession is that Fisher will be the next Aggies coach. Now get this, with a contract that runs for 7 years and surpasses the $50 million mark. That's big money potentially from a school that can pay it and a coach than Fisher that might demand it. That's what Zach Burnett from Football Scoop is reporting. Paul Feinbaum goes on the radio program WJOX in Birmingham, Alabama today. He said he's heard many times the relationship between Jimbo and Florida State is not good. Rumors about Jimbo have been out there for months. This is the worst kept secret in America. Jimbo is number 1 on Texas A&M's hit parade. I don't sense that Florida State's done much to keep him. Unless something falls apart, I think he'll go. You agree with Paul Feinbaum there. You impressed by the Zach Barnett numbers. Is Jimbo Fisher, current Florida State coach, going to be the next coach of Texas A&M?
Well, listen, I'm always going to err on the side of him staying at FSU because we've heard this for a couple of years in a row now that maybe Jimbo Fisher jumped ship. He's not happy with the administration at Florida State. They're not backing him financially with his assistant coaches, with the facilities, the way he thinks they need to in order to stay competitive in the ACC. But maybe he does find his way out. I think there's always opportunity there. And by the way, for a guy that might be comfortable at Florida State, anytime you throw out the number $50 million over the next 7 years, that's enough to get your attention. You're going to pay attention to whatever Texas A&M is saying. I think it is interesting to throw in the dynamic that Florida State is one of those teams that's not in a championship game but is playing this weekend against Louisiana Monroe. So Jimbo Fisher comes to the podium today and says, you know what, I'm not going to answer any questions about coaching opportunities out there. And that's the same answer he's been given for weeks now. But until I see him hop on that plane just like Dan Mullen today and land over in College Station, I don't know that I'm going to believe the story just yet.
Marshall M.J. Jones says Jimbo Fisher's overrated as a head coach. Listen, that's what I tell Mike all the time. I mean, who out there is such a great coach if Jimbo Fisher, who won a national championship and has coached like 4 first-round draft pick quarterbacks, who's a good coach if Jimbo Fisher is? I mean, we're out of good coaches then. I mean, because if Jimbo Fisher's not one, we don't have any good coaches.
Yeah. Well, I think that his message probably got a little stale in Tallahassee.
That may be true.
But I think you're dealing with a different dynamic of player in College Station. Does that make sense? You're going to probably have a little bit more discipline on that team. They've been a team that has had a lot of great players. Aside from Johnny Manziel, they've been a team that played within themselves a lot of the time. You're going to have good core players. You're going to have good offensive linemen at Texas A&M. You're going to have good edge rushers, and Jimbo Fisher can do a lot with that. The one thing you do know about Jimbo Fisher, maybe he has had a down year at Florida State, but when given the players, you know that he's a guy that can make a run in a national championship, and that's what Texas A&M wants.
So I'm going to say this: if Fisher were to take the Texas A&M job, I think it changes the future in the SEC. This idea that programs like A&M have some sort of lid on them, that they can only finish in the sort of fourth or third or maybe fifth in the SEC West. That's all an artificial construct.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that's a combination of resources and coach matched together. I think A&M would absolutely be right there with Auburn as the #1 long-term threat to Nick Saban, Alabama, in the SEC West. You give me Fisher at College Station, that becomes a program that I am very bullish on.
Well, and let's not sweep LSU under the rug just yet. They stumbled early in the year, but a heck of a finish for that LSU program.
I believe I may take the future of A&M over the future of LSU.
Well, and that's fair enough to say.
If Jimbo Fisher's hired.
Right, and that's fair enough to say. There's a lot of ifs in that statement before we go down that road. I'm with you. I think we talked about this last week that A&M is a possible sleeping giant. You know, when you talk about the finances available, the recruiting available, and the hunger inside of that program to be really good, you add in a good head coach, and it does feel a lot like when Nick Saban landed at LSU, a team that did have all, the recruiting in their corner, the finances, and all of a sudden they became awakened. You could see a possibility of that happening at Texas A&M.
A lot of y'all are talking about the Jason Witten rumor that's out there. We'll put that in the comment section. We'll talk about that coming up in just a moment here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Also, some of those names that we're not hearing at Tennessee. Why aren't we hearing those names? We'll do that all coming up in just a moment. For now, though, Gary and Christian Gulasano in the comment section says, who has more of the advantage? Georgia in the SEC championship game because it clinched a month ago and not knowing how to prepare against Auburn, who's riding high in emotion, just found out they're in the championship game this past weekend. So the preparation for this rematch, let's make that the subject of item number 5 here on AT&T SEC Country Live, our first and 10 list. And one thing is for sure that Georgia, in terms of sort of matching the edge or matching the focus that Auburn showed in the first time these two teams played, there are a couple tricks that Kirby Smart might have up his sleeve. One of the things may be this, reminding his players of something that Gus Malzahn said on the field after the game was over back in November. Do you remember when Gus Malzahn, after seeing his team dominate the then #1 ranked Bulldogs, gave a pretty prideful boast right there in the field? Here's Gus Malzahn.
We whipped the dog crap out of them.
So he said we whipped the dog crap out of them. In fairness to Malzahn, didn't know he was on camera, didn't know he was being recorded, although as a coach, maybe he should assume that he always is. You played for Nick Saban, who was Kirby Smart's mentor. If Saban had a team say this about him, my guess is that he and Scott Cochran, the strength and conditioning coach, would have used that this week. Do you think Kirby Smart's using that right now?
I don't think there's any doubt about it, and I don't even know if he needs to. I mean, when you look at how things played out in Jordan-Hare, a few weeks ago now, has it been 3 weeks since they played that game? I think that's enough to point to. A lot of times, if you're Kirby Smart, that his team did leave with a little bit of embarrassment.
Yeah.
Being the #1 team in the country and going on the road and losing in the fashion they did. I think that Kirby Smart's going to have this team ready to play, possibly like they haven't been ready all year. I mean, this is a team that is on a new stage, but Auburn is too. And getting to this level with this team right now, I think it's going to be a great game this weekend. I don't know that I look for Kirby Smart to do anything that much different than I saw against Auburn the first time around, but I can guarantee you there's going to be some wrinkles in that game plan coming up.
Well, one of the wrinkles in Kirby Smart's game plan may also be a little early gamesmanship here, potentially trying to work the officials a little bit. During the Iron Bowl, you may have noticed at the telecast that Gary Danielson let it be known that Kirby Smart was unhappy with the officiating from his team's loss to Auburn a few weeks before, citing the play of some of the Auburn defensive backs. I don't know if Danielson was supposed to say this, but here is what he said on CBS on Saturday night.
I'm just going to say it. I don't think it was off the record. You can stop me at any time. When we talked to Kirby Smart following the Auburn game, he felt that Auburn got away with a lot of holds in the secondary against his receivers. He sent in 6 plays to the SEC. He was not happy about what he had happen in that game.
So he sent 6 plays to the league office. He felt like Auburn defenders were holding his receivers, and this is a pretty commonplace thing. I think coaches do this each and every week, but it is that gamesmanship. Get it out there in the public. Someone suggested on Dog Nation Daily, my show today, that Kirby Smart may have not been bothered by the fact that Danielson said this publicly. Now, Smart didn't talk about this today during his own press conference, but maybe this is all part of him trying to plant the seeds of, hey, Auburn defenders, they hold. Watch for the holding. Watch the holding. Do you like the gamesmanship from Smart here going into this game?
I do. Why not give your team any edge they can get? And I think that when you look at the way the Auburn secondary has played in these last couple of matchups against Auburn and Georgia, they have been pretty locked down. We're going to sit here and talk about Jalen Hurts or Jake Fromm from those games. A lot of that has to do with how that secondary played, that a lot of these wide receivers from both of these teams, young wide receiver core from both teams, couldn't get a lot of separation, couldn't really get off some of these Auburn DBs. Maybe there was a little bit of holding for that. But I guarantee you before the game starts that Kirby Smart will be in these officials' ears and say, listen, they got away with a lot of that last time, and maybe that happened because of home field advantage, but this is a neutral site. Maybe he gets some of those calls. I don't mind the gamesmanship at all.
Jason Matthews says, does an elite team really need bulletin board material? I mean, you played on an elite team. Here's what I'm guessing. You'll say elite teams use anything they can for even an inch extra motivation, an inch extra preparation or focus. I mean, do you need it? I don't know if you need it, but you still want it.
Well, yeah, and you can look at the fact that it's an SEC championship game, and you say you probably don't need a ton of extra motivation when you talk about the first time that either one of these, any player on either one of these two teams has played in a game.
That's a good point.
And so you probably don't need a ton of extra motivation, but you're talking about college kids. You're talking about 18, 19, 20-year-old kids that, by the way, day in and day out are giving, between 16 and 18 hours of their time into this football game. Sometimes you need to get them in that corner and say, hey, here's what's on the line and here's what everybody's been saying about you. Let's get this thing pumped up an extra notch.
Alonzo Quintelis Carter says Jarrett Stidham is going to torch the Dogs. This could be a game that is in Stidham's lap a lot more than any game previous for Auburn this season because we'll talk about this a lot this week. We don't know the status of Kerryon Johnson yet. The running back, who's a tough guy, is going to try to play, but it looked like he was pretty hurt on Saturday. Even if he does give it a go, he may not be 100%. Is Alonzo right here? And this game is really going to be about Jarrett Stidham, and is Stidham going to be too much for Georgia?
Well, in my opinion, if you're Georgia right now, you come into this game with the offensive philosophy that we're going to play keep away. We're going to keep the ball in our offense's hands. If you can get 40-minute time of possession right now in Georgia, that's what you want. I think when you look at Auburn's passing game, when you look at what they're able to do against Alabama and Georgia, both elite defenses, by the way, that Auburn was able to really put points up on. You look at Ryan Davis, Nate Craig Myers, Darius Slayton, all those guys are game-changing wide receivers for Auburn right now, and you have to be worried about that as a Georgia guy. I think that until Jarrett Stidham is stopped, there's going to be questions about if anybody can stop him as they go on the stretch run.
Rodney Baumgartner says, why is Kentucky's helmet on the top shelf? It needs to be put on the bottom. We don't deserve top shelf billing.
Glad you asked.
Here's the thing. We actually, Mike and I both, we finally got our hands dirty, did a little work here. So you see the two teams for the conference championship right here in the middle. On the sides of us, though, here, these are like the SEC standings. So that's Kentucky third in the East, right? That's good enough for the top shelf in the East right now. Wildcats fans may not be that happy, but that's about all it takes in the SEC East.
I mean, when you look at that Tennessee-Vanderbilt game, neither one of those teams went in with an SEC win. Vanderbilt able to knock them off. That's how the standings played out. That's why the helmets are that way.
We actually tried to get our building maintenance staff to come in here and put a lot lower shelf to put Tennessee. We couldn't get that done in time.
Don't kick them while they're down, man. Don't kick them while they're down.
I'm kidding.
Tough weekend for them.
Speaking of the Vols, let's make them the subject of item number 6 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So we talked about T. Martin off the top of the show. We talked about the way that Greg Schiano, that situation was botched by John Curry, and what Schiano may do as a response. He may sue the team that the program was going to hire him in Tennessee. But all that sort of water under the bridge for right now. The T. Martin thing may be relevant, but everything else was yesterday's story for now. Today's story is, who should Tennessee hire? What should Tennessee do? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, what should the Vols do?
Well, obviously we're going to talk about Tennessee coaching candidates and people with Tennessee backgrounds, and we already talked about early in the show about T. Martin and David Cutcliffe. I think that's where you have to fall back to right now. You have to bring somebody in that the fans know, somebody's face that they've seen, and somebody they believe has a bright future as a head coaching candidate. That guy is T. Martin. Is T. Martin, does he love Tennessee enough to say, you know what? Don't matter what's going on right now, I'm going to head back to Knoxville and try to save this program. Very much like Scott Frost seemingly did this weekend. Scott Frost goes, you know what, maybe I can win more at other places, but Nebraska is a place for me right now, and that's where I want to set my sights on. Tennessee fans need T. Martin to do that. If it's T. Martin, if it's David Cutcliffe, I think you feel really good. I'm sure they're putting in a phone call to Jeff Brom up at Purdue right now, who looks like he's on that list of high-rising candidates. But then after that, I mean, you look at Mike Norvell. They already vetted Matt Campbell. I've even heard Les Miles, Kevin Sumlin, names like that being thrown around as possible guys that could take over that program as well. I don't know what the right answer is. I think Tennessee fans probably have a better sense on the pulse than I do. But I think you have to look in that direction.
So a lot of Tennessee fans are talking about Jason Witten, the idea that he would leave the Cowboys.
Right.
That rumor's out there. He'd leave the Cowboys and come be a part of whatever coaching staff that was put together by the Vols. I mean, look, off the top of the show, I gave a pretty impassioned plea on behalf of Tennessee fans. I'm not your enemy when it comes to this. I think Tennessee fans deserve a good coach here, and I think they've been mistreated by their own administration, so I'm on your side. But I think some of this sort of like pie in the sky.
Right.
Let's get some guy who's never coached before, Peyton Manning, Jason Witten, whatever. I mean, I feel like the Tennessee coaching search needs a dose of reality here.
Yeah.
Now, if Witten wants to do the hard work of learning how to be a coach, by all means, have at it, because that could be a great career for you after the NFL. But it is hard work, and it's a full-time commitment. It's not the kind of thing you just sort of transition to. It's a lot harder than being a broadcaster. I mean, there's a reason that a lot of guys like to do what we do as opposed to coaching, because coaching means 20-hour days, recruiting, and things like that. It's a very different kind of time commitment than being a broadcaster is. So, I mean, I think that Witten's doing himself a disservice if he acts like he could just flip a switch and go be a coach at Tennessee.
Yeah, and who knows what Jason Witten has said on this matter. I think a lot of people in and around the SEC, specifically up in Knoxville, ton of respect for Jason Witten as a player. But we talked a lot about John Gruden and how I thought that he's a terrible fit when you talk about coaching candidates, because he hasn't coached in 10 years, he hasn't coached on the college level. Add Jason Witten to the top of that list. If you're me talking about it, bringing a guy that's never even coached at all on any level, and Jason Witten, and to think he's going to turn around that Tennessee program. I'm sure he's a great guy. I've met Jason Witten before. I think he's a great guy, but not the guy you want leading a program right now that needs to come out of the gutter. You want somebody that's been there before.
Mike Griffith on the Tennessee podcast for SECCountry.com. Now, Mike's a frequent guest of ours here on AT&T SEC Country Live, but he's on the Tennessee podcast, and he kind of addressed what he thinks Tennessee's going to have to do to kind of shake off the bad memories of what happened with Greg Schiano and find a good coach. And for him, it involves one simple word. Here's Mike Griffith.
You pay him to be interested. You pay him to be, you say, you know what? How much, what, they're going to offer you 8, we're going to offer you 10. They're going to offer you 10. Mike Leach, great example. Mike Leach would rather go to Arkansas than Tennessee? Really? Okay, so that tells me some things. My first red flag is you're not doing a very good job recruiting to Tennessee. And that makes me question the administration a little bit. And second thing is you're not offering enough money. Everybody's got a price.
So he references the $1 Million Man there, Ted DiBiase, at the end of his comment there. But a couple thoughts on what Mike has to say. It's really simple to say, you know what, whatever coach is out there, you just offer more money and you'll get your guy. But there's a trade-off for that. And the trade-off is when things go wrong, that's one more expensive buyout you're about to pay out. And not only are you paying Butch Jones' buyout, you may be paying Greg Schiano's buyout here as well. You can't keep paying all these buyouts when things go poorly. So it's not without risk just to sort of up the ante in terms of salary stakes with the coaches that you're going after. Here's the other thing. The reason why a guy like Mike Leach might choose Arkansas over Tennessee actually may not have that much to do with salary. We're in an era right now in the SEC when all the league's coaches are making a lot of money. I believe every single person, maybe with the exception of Derek Mason, they all make more than $4 million. So everybody's making a lot of money. The next coach at Tennessee will, the next coach at Arkansas will. It's not about money. For me, it's about access to talent. It's about access to players. That's the issue that Tennessee's dealing with here going forward. That Arkansas pipeline to Texas, at least some inroads in Louisiana. It's a little easier to get players at Arkansas right now than it might be for Tennessee. That to me is sort of the underlying theme for this whole Tennessee job is the access to talent, which is the currency in college football. That may be why some people don't want this Tennessee job. Right?
Yeah, I think you have to take a long, hard look in the mirror right now if you are part of this Tennessee Vols fan base. And we've said it a million times on the show that we feel like Tennessee is one of the premier programs in college football, not just the SEC, but it can be back to the top. And I think it's that healthy respect that BA and I both have when you talk about the Tennessee program that leads us to ask a ton of questions. But right now, you know, Mike Griffith last week was talking about Jimbo Fisher. You know, a lot of people brought up Chris Peterson. Those guys aren't interested in those jobs right now. When you talk about what's going on at Tennessee, they need to find somebody that needs them as well. And that's why I think you're looking at T. Martin, David Cutcliffe. A lot of people in the comment section are also commenting and saying Les Miles possibly. I don't love that hire for them, but that's another guy that needs a head coaching gig, and possibly you give him a call as well.
I just take it very seriously that Miles went for the Purdue job and didn't get it.
Right.
There's something about Miles. You know, we see these guys on television. We assume they're all, you know, high stature, good coaches. Miles, I mean, the game just may have passed him by. I mean, the reports that are out there was, you know, that he interviewed for that job and kind of stumbled and bumbled his way through it and was just not an attractive hire for Purdue. If Purdue doesn't want him, Tennessee doesn't want him. That to me is as simple as that. Corey Tester asked, okay, BA, so who do you think the right guy is? I don't want to punt on this question, Corey, but here's the way I might answer it. Under normal circumstances, maybe I'd take a flyer on a Jeff Brom, who actually did get the Purdue job, or someone like that. A Jeremy Pruitt, who may be the next Kirby Smart, the current Alabama defensive coordinator Pruitt is. I might take a risk on something like that. But a risky hire for Tennessee on the heels of what happened with Schiano on Sunday may be the wrong decision. I would have never endorsed a guy like David Cutcliffe for this job, but maybe you do need 2 years of David Cutcliffe or a couple years of David Cutcliffe just to reboot this situation and get somebody else besides John Curry to make the next decision. That may be the bigger issue here, that you have to go to a guy like Cutcliffe just to sort of, you ever go to like a fancy restaurant, they talk about cleansing the palate? You know, you may just need to cleanse the palate here for a moment and work on the next superstar hire 24 months from now and use David Cutcliffe as a bit of a placeholder.
By the way, one of those palate cleansers is one of the reasons I wind up at Alabama. That's what Mike Shula was to a lot of people. He was a guy that came in and cleansed the palate. Mike Price gets fired after 3 months on the job, after spring football, because he's down in Pensacola, Florida, dealing with something he shouldn't have been dealing with. They have to move on from him after a couple of head coaches that were dumpster fire, and you bring in Mike Shula, a guy who knows a quality person who gets you through the next 3 or 4 years before you can hire a Coach Saban. Maybe you are right. I will say this about Les Miles, though, and we can talk about maybe the game has passed him by. One of the questions we have had about Tennessee this year is about their players and possibly the toughness they play with, specifically on defense. That's not a question you'll ask about any Les Miles coach team. They are always tough players, and I think that maybe that's an attitude change you do need to take.
Rodney Byer says, what about Bill Clark from UAB? He's probably going to be National Coach of the Year.
Yeah,
he took a program that didn't exist last year and made him bowl eligible this year. Yeah. The problem with that, though, is that's a pretty thin resume for Tennessee. I mean, as bad as things have gotten for the Vols, this is still the Tennessee job, and there is a heft to the resume of the coach they're supposed to hire.
Well, and I'll say this, too, about Bill Clark. From everything I've heard in and around Birmingham, he's a guy that feels like he owes that university a couple of years. I mean, you talk about trying to recruit players and saying, hey, we're going to build UAB back, and then leaving after 1 year. I'm not sure that's the guy Bill Clark is. He's already also agreed to an extension one time this year. I don't know if they'll be able to do it again, but I think he sticks around Birmingham another year.
Let me remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. That is Mike Johnson. My name is Brandon Adams, and if you watch us every week here on AT&T SEC Country Live, we'd invite you to come check us out in person on Friday, especially if you can get anywhere near the city of Atlanta. Of course, a lot of Georgia fans will be with us on Friday. No doubt your team in the championship game the following day. Auburn fans, if you're in town, make it a point to be with us. Our show on Friday, special broadcast for us on AT&T SEC Country Live, comes at you at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Hooters downtown, right there in Peachtree Street, downtown Atlanta. Great location. We were there last year. It's going to be a blast. It's going to be a huge, huge crowd. A great time. We'd love to shake your hand and say thank you for watching AT&T SEC Country Live. And for the podcast, folks, thank you for listening to the show. We'd love to meet you on Friday if you can be in Atlanta for that. It starts at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And by the way, speaking of Hooters, they got a great offer right now for SEC fans. It's $5 off any to-go order of $25 or more, but you've got to go online. Hooters.com for your online to-go order. You can get $5 off your order of $25 or more, but use the promo code SECFans. Once again, that promo code SECFans. All right, let's go back to the Florida situation for a moment with item number 7 on our AT&T SEC Country Live first and 10 list. And are you surprised that Dan Mullen went back to Florida after everything that we heard that suggested that that's not a decision he was likely to make?
I'm not surprised at all. And how many times in the last couple of weeks have we got on here and said that Florida's the best head coach opening in the country right now? When you talk about the ability to win championships, Florida has that pedigree. They have the recruiting grounds right in their background. I mean, you almost don't have to leave the state if you want to recruit in Gainesville right now. Dan Mullen knows that. You know, for everything the bad that his wife might have said or any downturn you can point to of his time in Gainesville, he knows that you can win championships. He's got a ring from his time there in Florida, and so that's maybe where he's trying to climb. He had reached a ceiling, in my opinion, at Mississippi State, and it was time for him to go. Florida just happened to kind of fall back on a couple of candidates and fall to Mullen, and I think he was right to jump ship.
Someone who was apparently surprised, though, was his former quarterback, Dak Prescott. Now at the Dallas Cowboys, he was asked about the Mullen situation. Here's what Prescott said initially about this situation, and I think it does sort of speak to the way that some people felt about this. Prescott was surprised. He told Brandon George, a reporter there for the Dallas Morning News, I didn't think he would go back to Florida, but money talks. That's what a guy that knows Mullen really well said about his thoughts on the Florida job. Now, apparently, Mullen got to his boy Prescott, and the Florida Gators got to him as well because he was sort of reprogrammed to say the company line here. And then Florida released its own statement trying to sort of buttress what Prescott had said off the cuff. He says, I'm very happy for Dan Mullen. His family will be going back with Scott Strickland. Florida players and fans are very lucky. He knows his players, knows how to get the very best out of each individual, and his confidence is contagious for the whole program. Now, one of those two statements sounds like something that Prescott really felt and really meant and really said. Another thing feels like something that was sort of written for him from a PR person. I'll let you guess which one is which.
Well, I think his original statement kind of tells you the lay of the land as far as a guy who, by the way, Dak Prescott, his allegiance isn't to Dan Mullen. His allegiance is to Mississippi State. He's a Mississippi State alum, so he's going to fall back on that first and foremost. As, hey, this guy left us, went to another SEC program, and he's going to have to come to Starkville next year to face that team. So I understand where Dak Prescott kind of lies when he has those comments, originally out the gate saying, why would anybody not want to be in Starkville? Of course he's going to head to Gainesville because of the money. I think that when Dak Prescott looks at it, though, he understands right now that Florida is the better opening of the two, and Dan Mullen was probably right to take that job.
But remember this, as we always say around the South, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And apparently Megan Mullen, Dan Mullen's wife, spent a lot of time in Gainesville in the past, not all that happy. We played this audio for you a few weeks ago here on AT&T SEC Country Live when these rumors first popped up. Let me remind you of how Megan Mullen viewed her time at Mississippi State as told to a Mississippi State podcast near the beginning of the season back in August. Here's Megan Mullen.
There is nothing like being a Mississippi State Bulldog. The support of the fans here is so unlike anything anywhere else. It's unbelievable. So I've never experienced a really bad situation. The former school where we were at before, we won 2 national championships there. Won practically every single game we played for 4 years there. And it wasn't if you won or lost. I didn't go to the grocery store. It was if we didn't score 43 points or more. I was going to the grocery store in Orlando where I worked at the Golf Channel, and I was driving the groceries back to Gainesville because it was that bad. That's just being honest.
Does that sound like the wife of a happy person right now, going back to Gainesville, a place that she didn't even grocery shop?
Well, let me just go ahead and set you aside on this one right now. By the way, the amount of money Dan Mullen's making in Gainesville right now, you pay somebody to go get those groceries.
That is
now.
true.
You pay somebody else to head out and go get those groceries. Megan Mullen will be sitting at the house counting her checks right now from Gainesville. I'm sure she's very happy to be down.
And the truth is, I think all this stuff does have to be brought up because I think it gives some context for what Mullen's doing by going back to Florida. But ultimately, I mostly agree with you that the pull to win at the highest level is ultimately just too great. Coach is coach. They want to coach at the place that gives them the best chance of win. The truth is, the Mullens, and I mean this in all sincerity, they may be going back to Gainesville knowing they're not going to be happy, but it's the kind of job you can't say no to. The magnetism to coach one of the top programs is just too great. And even if it's a short-term thing, and even if there's tension while they're there, winning at the highest level is its own addiction. The guys that do this job in the SEC level are addicted to winning. Otherwise, they'd go coach somewhere where it's easier.
Yeah, listen, if you're Dan Mullen right now, there's no bad way out of this. I think the football thing can go south. Maybe you don't work out as a head coach, but guess what? When you're leaving, you're getting a $10, $20 million buyout. Ask Kevin Sumlin right now. Ask some of the other coaches around the SEC. When you take jobs like this, yes, the expectations are high, but so is the money. And you can deal with that for 3, 4, and 5 years if that's what gets your family set for a long time.
A lot of comments. Mark Chambers says, Dan Mullen can buy a grocery store now. Hello.
Exactly.
Chris Smith agrees with you. He says money's the best antidepressant. Maybe so.
Yes, she will be okay.
Lawrence Robinson said Mullen topped out at Mississippi State. I do think Mississippi State fans would have grown tired of him eventually. It's one of the reasons why he probably wanted to move on. Bill Atchison says money's not everything, though. Dan's going to figure that out if Megan ever gives him a chance. Can you tolerate it for 4 or 5 years, though, and win a championship and then move on? The pressure is great there, but the truth is, if Mullen gets players, he's probably going to win. The only reason why McElwain didn't win at Florida was it wasn't getting players, and that's the whole issue. And by the way, this is going to be a really interesting thing to watch. I'm talking about right away. Early signing period begins December 20th. It ends December 22nd. By 2 or 3 days before Christmas, your opportunity to be successful in 2018 is going to either be open or closed. Maybe as many as 80% of the kids that sign this year may sign during December. If Mullen gets that class together in time before Christmas, before the early signing period, he may have a very good first season. If he doesn't, the same pressure that crushed McElwain may also be bearing down on him in 2018 as well.
I agree with you. My question is not can Dan Mullen be successful and win games in Gainesville? It's how many can he win? I think that I think the downside of hiring Mullen in Gainesville right now is you possibly look at a Kevin Sumlin scenario where he can get you a ton of wins, but he doesn't know if he can get them over the top. Maybe he does have some of those 9-win seasons, those 10-win seasons, but does he win an SEC title? Facing off against Kirby Smart every year, Will Muschamp's on the up and up, and then you're going to have to go to Atlanta and possibly face Nick Saban. Can he get over that hump with his new players at Florida? I think that's the biggest question you ask yourself if you're a fan in Gainesville.
Let me do item number 8 here in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So we talked earlier about the Iron Bowl. Auburn gets that win. They win the SEC West. Alabama finishes the regular season as an 11-1 team, but maybe still alive for a spot in the college football playoff if it can get some help. Here's what Nick Saban said about his team's candidacy for the postseason after the game on Saturday.
I think this team deserves the opportunity to get in the playoff by what they've been able to accomplish and what they've been able to do. Certainly not maybe in this game, but I think the team we play tonight is a very good football team and probably one of the best teams in the country. They've won 11 games. Not very many teams are able to do that. And I really don't know what all the scenarios might be where we would have an opportunity to do it. I'd certainly like to see this team get the opportunity to do it, and I think they deserve it.
So I'm going to ask you a 3-part question, which is essentially just sort of 3 versions of the same question. Can, will, should Alabama make the college football playoff?
Can they? Absolutely. I think when you look at the Big Ten championship game, you're going to circle Ohio State possibly over Wisconsin in that game. That definitely opens up the door. You're also going to look at TCU, Oklahoma. What's going to happen in that Big 12 title game? That's the can of it. Can they get in? Absolutely they can. It's going to come down to probably, if Ohio State wins that game against Wisconsin, who has a better resume? I think that's Alabama, even if they're not an SEC champion. Will they? I have no idea. I don't know what the committee's going to do. How many angles they're going to have to look at it from. I think that you're going to have to try to envelop everything that's happened in the last couple of years. By the way, Ohio State gets in last year, not going to their championship game too, and they have a similar resume to what Alabama had. Should they get in? I think they absolutely should, and that's not just me coming from a Bama guy. I think when you look at an 11-1 team that's only the loss was by 12 points on the road to the number 6 team in the country. I think that Auburn deserved to win that game. I think they won the game handily. But I think on a neutral site, Alabama gets most teams that are going to be in that top 4 that you probably give them a lot of respect.
So I know people don't like when I say this, but I just believe it's 1,000% true. The College Football Playoff Selection Committee is not putting 3 teams from the Deep South in playoff. That's terrible for ratings. That has nothing to do with resumes and who sort of compares favorably side by side between Alabama and Ohio State. That's one of those popular comparisons that gets made. This is all about business. If Clemson wins the ACC, you'd either have Auburn or Georgia from the SEC. Alabama as sort of an at-large entrance into the playoff. That's too many teams from the Deep South. That would wreck the TV gradings. The playoff is designed to prevent these kinds of geographic imbalances. To me, it's as simple as that. This playoff is not making a decision that's bad for business, and 3 teams from the same part of the country, even if it's good football, that's bad for business.
Let me tell you right now, I could not disagree with you more. I really could not disagree with that more because the angle I look at it from, think of how much the Sugar Bowl is licking their chops over 2 teams from the state of Alabama replaying an Iron Bowl game, possibly in the Sugar Bowl. Or not only that, an Alabama-Clemson rematch in a possible Sugar Bowl game. I think when you're the committee, you look at it and say, you know what, maybe we don't encompass other parts of the country, but when you talk about rabid fan bases and people that are going to travel to these games, those teams are all in the Deep South, and I think that the committee understands that. They understand where the home of college football is for a lot of the parts, and I think that they will give Alabama the benefit of the doubt. I think that if Ohio State gets in with the 2 losses they had this year to another team that's going to be in the top 4 in Oklahoma and on the road by 31 points, just because of geographic location, I wouldn't understand that. And that's honestly, that's not the Alabama coming out of me. I think that that's just how the committee thinks, and they think that these matchups would be crazy once you get to the playoff. They would look great on paper.
One more quick final point for me on this subject. We're going to talk about 2 other SEC teams we haven't mentioned yet on today's show. The other storyline here that I think has been ignored, and I'm guilty of it, I have not been paying attention to this. You know who I think is still alive for the playoff that we haven't talked about at all? USC. Pac-12 champion with 2 losses. Stanford beats Notre Dame on Saturday. All of a sudden looks a lot better. That's another one of those examples of, I hate to keep ringing this bell, but USC is LA, brings an entire region of the country into the playoff discussion. A 2-loss USC in comparison with Alabama as a 1-loss non-conference champion. I think the committee's also going to award USC in that spot as well.
I could see that happening. And in my opinion, they would deserve the benefit of the doubt over Ohio State. And it's like I said, I'm not on the committee. I don't know how they're going to react. Can Alabama get in? Yes. Should they is another question in a whole, but geographic location, in my opinion, is not what it's going to be. It's going to come down to who has that 13th data point, and if USC is that team, then so be it.
Item number 9, our AT&T SEC Country Live first and 10 list. Arkansas fired its coach Brett Bielema on Saturday, and some criticism for how it happened. Immediately after the game, as an example of this, Mark Schlabo on Twitter kind of went in on Arkansas. He said you can argue that Bielema didn't win enough, but unless a coach has committed NCAA violations or grossly embarrassed the university with his conduct, no one deserves to be fired while walking off the field. That was the rumor that he had been fired walking off the field. There was some clarification of this. Someone responded back to Bielema that he wasn't fired walking off the field. He was told in the locker room, not on the field. And you see Eric Hild here with some of that video of Bielema saying goodbye. You'll see here in the video that no one's walking up to him and saying, sorry, coach, you're fired. This happens after he leaves the field. But for me, Mike, all of this melodrama is, to me, pointless. We're paying these guys millions and millions of dollars. He's got a massive buyout. When do you want to fire him? I mean, Mike Riley, the Nebraska coach, wasn't fired. Had to go do his press conference and asked all those questions. People were mad about that as well. I mean, we're giving these guys a buyout for essentially doing nothing. Can't that be enough? Do we have to worry about their feelings too?
I think it should. And listen, a lot of people were calling Brett Bielema classy, and I think the way he approached it was a very classy approach. To me, right now, what you have is these boosters that run the program at Arkansas. Jeff Long has been ousted. All of a sudden, Brett Bielema has become fired. You have the boosters that are really, kind of pointing towards the direction of where this program is going to be going. I actually kind of liked the fact that he did get a chance to address his team after the game. If you fire him after he leaves the stadium, then all of a sudden he's on the outs. He's like Jim McElwain. He's approaching you on the practice field possibly for some of this other stuff going on. He got a chance to step in front of his team and say, you know what, guys, I've been let go. I've been fired. You guys are going to have a different head coach next year. And from that angle, as a former player, I happen to kind of like it. I know that the players right now don't like it down at Arkansas, but I'm telling you right now, to give him the opportunity to stand up there and say that, I think that was the right thing to do.
Love Raymond Cox's comment, who says, media call for him to be fired, then show sympathy when they didn't get fired the way the media expected. This is so true. A lot of these big national media guys, they like Brett Bielema, so they want to defend him.
Right.
And that's all this is.
Yeah,
it's the blue check brigade trying to protect a guy that's probably been a source to them over the course of the years, and I wouldn't be surprised by that at all.
Well, I'm not surprised either. It's like I said, right now what you have are the boosters at Arkansas saying, you know what, we deserve a better football team. We're going to write the checks. And by the way, if you're going to ouster Jeff Long and you're going to ouster Brett Bielema, open up that checkbook and go out, and whatever amount of money it costs you to get the right guy at Arkansas, you better pay it now because you've already made your bed.
All right, item number 10, our AT&T SEC Country Live first and 10 list. Let me wrap this up here with Matt Luke on a day of a lot of coaching rumors and coaching news. Luke going to Ole Miss is the Ole Miss story here, who decides, you know what, we're not going to get into this fray whatsoever. We're not going to be a part of coaching rumors and chase down some big name. The interim guy, he just beat our rival. He's probably good enough. Mississippi State's losing its coach. We'll keep ours. Brighter future here. Ole Miss hiring the new coach, who was the old coach. Mississippi State having to go out and find a coach to replace Dan Mullen. Who do you like better here for the next 2 or 3 years? Is it Mississippi State? Is it Ole Miss?
I think you have to obviously look at who Mississippi State's going to bring in. I mean, until we see what kind of coach Mississippi State's able to bring in, I don't know that I can accurately answer that question. There was a little bit of me that when this Matt Luke decision came down that you thought maybe this is a little bit Ed Orgeron-esque. Maybe this was kind of their fallback option. They couldn't get their guy. They reached out to Willie Taggart and some of the other coaches from across the country, didn't find a lot of interest, and thought, you know what, worst come to worst, we're under sanctions for next year. All this kind of stuff's going to start coming down. Matt Luke loves Ole Miss program. He's been a lifer. Why not give him the job right now, be a Band-Aid for right now, and kind of get us to the next chapter in Ole Miss? Either he works out and you can keep him for long term and he's a guy that'll stick there for his life, or he doesn't work out and you're back to square one with a lot less competitors in the job market next year.
It seems bleak at Mississippi State right now. Lost the Egg Bowl, lost your coach. But if you hire somebody like Jeremy Pruitt, the next 5 years are way better in Starkville than they are in Oxford, I believe.
Yeah.
Way better.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think you have to look at whoever Mississippi State's going to bring in. We saw a lot of names today being thrown around. Todd Monken, Tampa Bay Bucks offensive coordinator, that his job could be in jeopardy. So that might be something he looks at doing, but I don't know the answer to that. I don't know who Mississippi State's going to be able to get.
We have a very funny champion of life. It is Iron Bowl related today. Mike hasn't seen it. We'll get a good reaction from him on this in just a moment. Before that, though, let me remind you, AT&T is a proud sponsor of our program, SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. All right, let me go ahead, speaking of AT&T, do the AT&T look ahead. We got some big championship games coming up this weekend. You see, these are the Saturday games. The bottom game is the Friday game. Ohio State, Wisconsin, Big Ten title game. I think that's a win and you're in type scenario for the Big Ten. Miami, Clemson, I believe that's also a win and you're in type scenario. Georgia, Auburn, I believe that's win and you're in the college football playoff. If Oklahoma wins, it's also in. Those are the 4 conference games that if the right teams win, either the first 3, Oklahoma, that's your college football playoff. If something weird happens there, I think the door is open for USC if it beats Stanford. Not Stanford beating USC, but USC beating Stanford. And then after that, I think you get to Alabama. Do you agree?
I don't see Ohio State, Wisconsin as a win and you're in. And it's not just about Alabama. I think that, as you brought up earlier, you also throw USC into that mix of, I think it's the ACC champion, the SEC champion. And after that, I think there is a lot of points that you can point to and say, you know what, I'm not sure. Ohio State, to me, would be one of the weaker teams that we've put into the Final Four, specifically when you look at how they played last year. They got the benefit of the doubt last year and got put in on the back end and got beat 31-0 by the eventual national champions. I kind of see them the same way this year. I could see USC definitely getting in over Ohio State.
Bo Molinari in the comment section a moment ago said, hey, y'all, where's the champion of life? Hey, still every day. No Butch Jones, but we still have champions of life here on AT&T SEC Country Live. And listen, a lot of y'all know what it's like to feel like on the day after a college football game, waking up with a big headache. We've all kind of been there before. Maybe not quite such a big headache as this. One Alabama fan, drowning his sorrows after the Auburn win, gets a little too tipsy and has quite a face-to-face meeting with an inanimate object. Take a look here. Old Row Sports brings this to us. Alabama fan staggering, stumbling along, and then boom! Runs right into the telephone pole. Watch this again. Boom!
Oh man, that's not doctored either, man. That looked like it hurt right there.
Yeah, listen, if there was ever a metaphor for Alabama's playoff hopes, that video might have been it. Everything, you're just kind of skating right along.
Yeah, I think if there was a mascot for how a lot of Alabama fans, including myself, felt Saturday night, that's probably the right one.
All right, we got to go. Come see us Friday. Hooters, downtown Atlanta. We'll be there starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Love to see you, no matter who you root for. We just like to shake your hand and say thanks for watching AT&T SEC Country Live. Listen to the podcast on iTunes. Subscribe to us. Give it a rating and review. We appreciate that. Share this show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know we're talking about the SEC here on AT&T SEC Country Live. We'll see you tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Y'all have a good day.